The blood-red sunrise painted the Wyoming sky as Mabel Collins crouched behind the weathered barn, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other clutching her meager belongings. 6 months pregnant and alone, she had traveled over 200 miles to escape the whispers that followed her in her hometown, only to find that Jackson, Wyoming territory, 1878, might not be the sanctuary she had hoped for. The morning air bit at her skin as she peered around the corner of the barn, watching townsfolk begin their day. Mabel had arrived under cover of darkness last night, spending what remained of it huddled against the barn's rough planks, too afraid to seek lodging at the town's only hotel. The whispers had followed her from Missouri. An unmarried woman with child was unwelcome nearly everywhere in this unforgiving frontier. "You planning on sitting there all day, or you got somewhere to be?" Mabel startled, nearly dropping the small bundle containing her possessions. She turned to find a tall man regarding her with curious blue eyes. His weather-beaten face spoke of years under the sun, and the worn leather chaps and dusty boots marked him clearly as a cowboy. Despite his imposing frame, there was something kind in his expression that made her hesitate before running. "I'm Owen Ellis," he said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "And you look like you could use some help, madam." Mabel's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I don't need charity, Mr. Ellis." "Never said you did," he replied. "But a lady sleeping behind Wilkinson's barn suggests otherwise." Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, a gesture that didn't escape Owen's notice. His expression softened further. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. Mabel couldn't remember. The stagecoach journey had depleted her meager funds, leaving her with nothing but a few coins that wouldn't stretch far in this town. Pride warred with hunger, and hunger won. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. Owen nodded and replaced his hat. "There's a cafe down the street. Nothing fancy, but the food's decent. I'd be obliged if you join me." Mabel hesitated. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. But the baby kicked, reminding her that her decisions no longer affected just herself. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. "Because somebody once helped me when I was at my lowest," Owen answered simply. "Name's a powerful thing, you know, might make conversation easier." Despite her reservations, Mabel found herself responding. "Mabel Collins." "Well, Miss Collins, shall we get some breakfast? You can tell me your story or not, that's your business." Something in his straightforward manner eased her fears slightly. With one hand still protectively over her unborn child, she nodded and followed him from behind the barn. The town of Jackson was smaller than she'd expected, just a main street with wooden buildings on either side, a few side streets with modest homes, and mountains rising majestically in the background. People already bustled about, and Mabel felt eyes turn toward her as she walked beside Owen. The cafe was a simple establishment with a few tables scattered about. A rotund woman with graying hair greeted Owen warmly. "Morning, Martha," Owen said. "Table for 2, if you please." The woman's eyes traveled from Owen to Mabel, lingering on her evident condition. Her smile dimmed slightly, but she led them to a corner table. "Coffee?" she asked, her tone noticeably cooler when addressing Mabel. "Yes, please," Mabel said softly. "And water." Once Martha had moved away, Mabel leaned forward. "They're already judging me." Owen shrugged. "Folks are quick to judge what they don't understand. Martha's harmless, though her tongue can be sharp as a whip." "I've had enough judgment to last a lifetime," Mabel murmured. "That why you're running?" She looked up sharply. "What makes you think I'm running?" "Nobody sleeps behind a barn when they've got somewhere to go," he said simply. The coffee arrived, along with a plate of biscuits that Owen hadn't ordered. Martha placed them on the table with a nod before departing. "See," Not so bad, Owen said, pushing the plate toward Mabel. She took a biscuit gratefully, trying to restrain herself from devouring it too quickly. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Owen, he corrected. Owen, she repeated, savoring the warm food. I don't know how I'll repay you. No need, he said, sipping his coffee. But if you're looking for work and a place to stay, I might have a proposition for you. Mabel's guard immediately went up. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the request, the expectation. Seeing her expression, Owen quickly added, "Nothing untoward, Miss Collins. I run a small ranch about 3 miles outside town. My housekeeper, Mrs. Beatty, is getting on in years and could use help with cooking and cleaning. There's a separate room off the kitchen where you could stay. Decent pay, meals included." Mabel hesitated. It sounded too good to be true. Why would you offer such a position to a woman in my condition? Owen's expression turned serious. Because I judge folks by their character, not their circumstances. I don't know your story and you don't have to tell me, but everyone deserves a chance. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Still, Mabel had learned the hard way that trusting too quickly could be dangerous. I appreciate the offer, but I don't know you, Mr. Ellis. Fair enough, he nodded. Ask around town about me if you like. I've been in these parts 15 years. Or come see the ranch first, meet Mrs. Beatty. If you don't like what you see, I'll bring you back to town, no questions asked. Before she could respond, the cafe door opened and 3 women entered, their hushed conversation stopping abruptly when they spotted Mabel. Their stares were not subtle, and one leaned to whisper to another. Charity Drive must be in town, one said, loud enough to be heard. Mabel's cheeks burned with shame as she lowered her eyes to her plate. Owen's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. Seems the Temperance League is out early today, he commented. Ladies, he acknowledged with a tip of his hat, his tone polite but cool. The women moved to a table on the opposite side of the room, still casting glances in their direction. This is how it begins, Mabel said quietly. Soon the whole town will know. They'd have known anyway, Owen replied pragmatically. Small towns have big eyes and bigger mouths. Martha returned with plates of eggs and bacon. Don't mind them, she said, nodding toward the women. They treat everyone that way who isn't in their sewing circle. Mabel was surprised by the sudden solidarity, but managed a small smile of thanks. As they ate, Owen outlined more details about the ranch and the position. It was modest by some standards, a main house, bunkhouse for the few hands he employed, barn and corrals. He raised cattle primarily but had a small horse breeding operation on the side. Mrs. Beatty's been with me since I bought the place, he explained. Good woman, but her arthritis makes it hard for her to handle everything now. She'd welcome the help, especially with someone who could take over the cooking. I'm a fair cook, Mabel admitted. My mother taught me. That's good enough for me, Owen said. What do you say? At least come see the place before you decide. With few options and the growing discomfort of being the center of unwanted attention, Mabel found herself agreeing. I'll look at the ranch, she said, but I make no promises beyond that. Owen nodded, seemingly satisfied. My wagon's at the livery. We can head out once you're finished eating. The ride to Owen's ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Mabel sat beside him on the wagon bench, watching as the town receded behind them and the landscape opened up into rolling plains backed by distant mountains. The beauty of Wyoming territory was undeniable, vast and untamed in a way that made her feel both insignificant and somehow freer than she'd felt in months. How far along are you? Owen asked suddenly, breaking the silence. 6 months, Mabel answered, surprised by the directness of the question. He nodded. My sister had 3 children. I recognized the signs. Where is your sister now? A shadow passed over his face. She passed 5 years ago. Fever took her and her husband both. Their children are with their grandparents back east. I'm sorry, Mabel said sincerely. Life out here can be harsh, he replied, but it has its rewards too. As they crested a small rise, Owen's ranch came into view. It was exactly as he described, modest but well-maintained. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure built of logs with a covered porch wrapping around the front. A barn stood nearby, along with corrals containing horses. In the distance, cattle grazed on the open range. It's not much, Owen said, but it's home. It's beautiful, Mabel replied honestly. As they pulled up to the house, the front door opened, and an older woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her face broke into a genuine smile at the sight of Owen. "You're back earlier than expected," she called. "Had a productive morning, Mrs. Beatty," Owen replied, helping Mabel down from the wagon. "This is Miss Collins. She might be able to help you with the housekeeping we discussed." Mrs. Beatty's eyes widened slightly at Mabel's condition, but unlike the women in town, her expression softened immediately. "Goodness, child, you must be exhausted," she said, moving forward. "Come inside and sit down before you fall down." Mabel found herself ushered into a comfortable kitchen warmed by a large cast iron stove. The house was simply furnished but clean and well kept. Mrs. Beatty bustled about, preparing tea and asking questions that somehow managed to be both probing and kind. "Owen says you're a good cook," she asked, setting a cup of tea before Mabel. "I can manage most dishes," Mabel replied, "though I haven't had much opportunity lately." Mrs. Beatty nodded understandingly. "These bones of mine aren't what they used to be. Can't stand at the stove for hours like I once did. The men complain I don't make biscuits as often as they'd like." "I make good biscuits," Mabel offered. "Then you're hired," Mrs. Beatty declared with a laugh. "Owen, show her the room while I finish lunch." Owen led Mabel through the kitchen to a small but clean room with a single bed, chest of drawers, and a window overlooking a kitchen garden. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's private." "It's perfect," Mabel whispered, overcome by the sudden realization that she might have found sanctuary after all. "Rest a bit," Owen suggested. "We can talk more after lunch." Left alone, Mabel sat on the edge of the bed, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. This place, far from the scorn and whispers that had driven her from home, might be where she and her child could start anew. The coming weeks saw Mabel settling into life at the Ellis Ranch. Mrs. Beatty proved to be a kind mentor, showing her the routines of the household without prying into her past. The older woman's hands were indeed crippled with arthritis, making Mabel's assistance invaluable. In return, Mrs. Beatty shared recipes passed down through generations and stories of her own youth that often left Mabel laughing until tears came to her eyes. Owen was frequently absent during daylight hours, busy with the cattle and horses that were his livelihood. When present, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a respectful distance. Meals were taken together: Owen, Mrs. Beatty, Mabel, and the 3 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. The atmosphere was familial in a way that Mabel hadn't experienced since her parents' passing 3 years prior. One evening, as Mabel kneaded dough for the next morning's biscuits, she became aware of Owen watching her from the doorway. "Something wrong?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Not at all," he replied. "Just appreciating the fact that the men haven't stopped talking about your cooking since you arrived." Mabel smiled, pleased by the compliment. "It's nice to be appreciated for something." "You're appreciated for more than your cooking," Owen said quietly. Their eyes met briefly before Mabel looked away, focusing intently on the dough beneath her hands. In the 6 weeks since her arrival, Owen had never once questioned her about the circumstances that had brought her to Jackson, pregnant and alone. His reticence had been a blessing, allowing her to heal without judgment, but she knew questions lingered in his mind. "I was engaged," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. "Back in Missouri." Owen remained silent, giving her space to continue if she wished. "His name was Henry. We were to be married last fall." Her hands worked the dough with more force than necessary. "When I told him I was with child, he disappeared, left town without a word." "Coward," Owen muttered. "My parents are gone. I have no family," when people realized. She swallowed hard. "The minister's wife suggested I go to a home for fallen women in St. Louis. That's when I decided to leave." Owen moved further into the kitchen, sitting at the table. "Why Jackson? I had a map. It seemed far enough away." Mabel laughed without humor. "I thought no one would know me here, that I could claim to be a widow. But I realized quickly that an unmarried woman with child is viewed the same everywhere." "Not everywhere," Owen countered softly. "Not by everyone." Mabel shaped the dough into biscuits, placing them on a tray. "You and Mrs. Beatty have been kinder than I had any right to expect. I don't know how I'll ever repay that kindness." "There's nothing to repay," Owen insisted. "You work hard and earn your keep. That's all anyone could ask." Mabel placed the tray near the stove for the morning baking and wiped her hands on her apron. "Still, thank you. No need for thanks, but you're welcome all the same." Owen stood, hesitating before adding, "I'm riding into town tomorrow for supplies. Would you like to come along? Might do you good to get off the ranch for a spell." Mabel's initial instinct was to decline. Her previous experience in Jackson had not been pleasant, but after 6 weeks of isolation at the ranch, she found herself longing for a change of scenery. "I'd like that," she said finally. "If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Owen assured her. "We'll leave after breakfast." The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Mabel dressed in her best dress, which still strained against her now 7-month belly, and joined Owen for the ride to town. Mrs. Beatty had given her a shopping list and some money from the household funds, entrusting her with selecting fabric for new curtains. "I've been wearing these eyes for over 70 years, Mrs. Beatty had declared, "and they tell me you have good taste. Get something cheerful for the parlor." The wagon ride was pleasant, with Owen pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. Mabel found herself relaxing in his company, laughing at his dry humor and thoughtful observations. Jackson looked different in the light of day with Owen beside her. The town was bustling with activity, miners from nearby claims mingling with ranchers and townsfolk. Owen directed the wagon to the general store, helping Mabel down with careful hands. "Mr. Patterson carries most everything," he explained as they entered the store. "Good man, fair prices." The proprietor greeted Owen warmly before his eyes settled on Mabel. Recognition flickered across his features. "Mr. Ellis," he acknowledged. "And who might this young lady be?" "Miss Collins," Owen replied. "She's helping Mrs. Beatty at the ranch." Mr. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "A pleasure, Miss Collins. What can I help you with today?" Mabel produced Mrs. Beatty's list, and Mr. Patterson set about gathering the requested items. As he did, the bell above the door jingled, announcing new customers. Mabel turned to see the same 3 women from the cafe entering the store. Their conversation halted abruptly upon spotting her. "Mr. Ellis," the tallest of the 3 acknowledged, her tone cool. "What a surprise to see you in town. We so rarely have the pleasure." "Mrs. Harrington," Owen replied with a tip of his hat. "Ladies." Mrs. Harrington's gaze shifted to Mabel, eyes narrowing. And I see you've brought company. Miss Collins works for me, Owen stated matter-of-factly. She assists Mrs. Beatty with the household. How charitable of you, Mrs. Harrington remarked, her tone making the word sound like an accusation. Mabel felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She should have expected this reaction. In her experience, women could be far crueler than men when it came to judging those who had strayed from the accepted path. Not charity, Mrs. Harrington, Owen corrected. Good business. Miss Collins is an excellent cook and has been a tremendous help to Mrs. Beatty. I consider myself fortunate to have found her. The sincerity in his voice caused Mabel to glance at him in surprise. Owen met her gaze steadily before turning back to Mrs. Harrington. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have errands to complete. He guided Mabel to another section of the store, effectively ending the conversation. Once out of earshot, Mabel whispered, "You didn't have to defend me." "Wasn't defending you," Owen replied, "just stating facts." They completed their purchases in relative peace, though Mabel was acutely aware of the whispered conversations and sidelong glances that followed them through the store. By the time they finished and loaded their supplies into the wagon, a sense of relief washed over her at the prospect of returning to the ranch. As Owen helped her onto the wagon seat, a man's voice called out, "Ellis, hold up." Owen turned to see the town sheriff approaching. "Sheriff Bradley," he greeted. "Something I can do for you," the sheriff, a stocky man with a mustache that seemed to have a life of its own, cast a curious glance at Mabel before addressing Owen. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. There's been reports of cattle rustling over near the Thompson place. Might want to keep an eye on your herd." "Appreciate the warning," Owen replied. "I'll alert the hands," the sheriff nodded, his eyes drifting back to Mabel. "Madam," he acknowledged with a touch to his hat brim. "Sheriff," she replied softly. As they pulled away from town, Mabel let out a long breath. "I don't think I'll ever get used to the way people look at me." "People will always find reasons to judge," Owen said. "Best not to give them the satisfaction of seeing it bother you." "Is that how you live your life? Unbothered by others' opinions?" Owen considered this. "Not entirely. I care what decent folks think, but I've learned that often the loudest judgments come from those with the most to hide." They traveled in companionable silence for a while before Mabel asked, "Have you always lived in Wyoming?" "No," Owen replied. "Born in Pennsylvania. Came west after the war. Spent some time in Colorado before settling here." "You fought in the war?" Mabel asked, curious about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "Union cavalry," Owen confirmed. "Not something I talk about much." The solemnity in his voice told her more than words could about his experiences. "My father fought too," she offered. "He came home different." "Mother said the war changed many men." "Your mother was right," Owen agreed. "When did you lose them?" "Father 3 years ago. His lungs never recovered from a fever he caught during the war. Mother followed 6 months later. Some said it was a broken heart, but I think it was the consumption that took her." "I'm sorry," Owen said. "It's not easy being alone in this world." "No," Mabel agreed, her hand moving to her stomach. "But I won't be alone much longer." Owen's eyes followed the gesture, his expression softening. "No, you won't." Upon their return to the ranch, Mrs. Beatty greeted them eagerly, especially delighted with the blue and yellow fabric Mabel had selected for the parlor curtains. "Perfect," she exclaimed. "Brings a bit of sunshine inside. I'll start on these tomorrow." "Let me help," Mabel offered. "I'm handy with a needle." "That would be lovely, dear," Mrs. Beatty agreed. "Between the two of us, we'll have them up in no time." That evening, as Mabel prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the day's events. Despite the uncomfortable moments in town, she had enjoyed the outing, particularly Owen's company. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't since before her parents' passing. It was dangerous, she knew, to develop feelings for a man after what had happened with Henry. Yet Owen was nothing like her former fiancé. Where Henry had been charming and quick with promises, Owen was straightforward and reliable. He didn't offer pretty words, but his actions spoke volumes. Mabel placed a hand on her rounded belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Should we trust him?" The baby kicked in response, bringing a smile to her face. For now, she decided, it was enough to have found a safe harbor. The future would reveal itself in due time. As her pregnancy progressed, Mabel found herself increasingly grateful for Mrs. Beatty's motherly presence. The older woman offered practical advice about childbirth and infant care, drawing on her experience as a midwife in her younger years. "Babies aren't nearly as fragile as new mothers fear," she assured Mabel as they sat on the porch shelling peas one afternoon. "They're remarkably sturdy little creatures." "I know so little about caring for a child," Mabel confessed. "My mother would have guided me, but—" Mrs. Beatty patted her hand. "You'll have me, dear, and you'll be surprised how much comes naturally." The conversation paused as Owen rode into the yard, returning from checking fence lines with two of his hands. He dismounted with fluid grace, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow before approaching the porch. "Ladies," he greeted. "Productive afternoon." "More so than yours, I'll wager," Mrs. Beatty replied with a smile. "You look like you've been wrestling dust devils." Owen laughed, a rich sound that Mabel had come to cherish. "Close enough. The north fence needed more work than expected." His eyes moved to Mabel, his expression softening. "How are you feeling today, Miss Collins?" "Well enough," she replied, though in truth her back ached constantly now that she had entered her 8th month. "The baby is active." Owen nodded, a look crossing his face that Mabel couldn't quite interpret. "Good to hear. I'll clean up before supper." As he walked toward the house, Mrs. Beatty chuckled softly. "What's amusing?" Mabel asked. "That man," Mrs. Beatty replied, nodding toward Owen's retreating form. "He's been alone too long." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Beatty gave her a knowing look. "I've worked for Owen Ellis for 12 years. In all that time, he's never looked at a woman the way he looks at you." Mabel felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Beatty, surely you're mistaken. Mr. Ellis has been kind, nothing more." "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Beatty replied, clearly unconvinced. "Just know that Owen is a good man, the best I've known. He doesn't offer his heart easily, but when he does, it's true." Even to a woman carrying another man's child, Mabel couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "A child is a blessing, regardless of circumstances," Mrs. Beatty said firmly. "Owen knows that better than most." Before Mabel could ask what she meant, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. She gasped, dropping the pea pod she'd been holding. "Mabel," Mrs. Beatty asked, alarmed. "What is it?" "Just a pain," Mabel managed, trying to smile reassuringly. "It's past now." Mrs. Beatty's eyes narrowed with concern. "How long have you been having pains?" "Off and on since morning," Mabel admitted. "But they're not regular," Mrs. Beatty murmured. "Could be practice pains. Your body preparing. Still, best to take it easy for the rest of the day." Mabel nodded agreement, but as she stood to take the bowl of shelled peas inside, another pain gripped her, stronger than before. She clutched the porch railing, her knuckles white. "Owen," Mrs. Beatty called sharply. "Come quickly." He appeared almost instantly, as though he'd been waiting just inside the door. Seeing Mabel's distress, he crossed the porch in 2 strides. "What's happening?" he demanded. "The baby," Mrs. Beatty explained. "I think it might be coming early." Fear gripped Mabel's heart. It was too soon, nearly a month before she'd expected. "No," she whispered. "It's too early." Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them, Mrs. Beatty said firmly. Owen, help her to her room. I'll gather what we need. With gentle efficiency, Owen lifted Mabel into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. She gasped at the sudden contact, one hand automatically going to his shoulder for balance. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice steady and reassuring as he carried her through the house to her room. The next several hours passed in a haze of pain and fear for Mabel. Mrs. Beatty took charge with calm authority, sending Owen for hot water and clean linens while she examined Mabel. "The baby is definitely coming," she confirmed. "But these things take time, especially with a first child. Try to rest between pains." Rest seemed impossible as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. Mabel bit her lip to keep from screaming, not wanting to disturb the household more than she already had. Mrs. Beatty saw through her stoicism. "Don't hold back, girl," she advised. "Birth is hard work. Let your body do what it needs to." Outside the door, Owen paced the kitchen floor, pausing at every sound from Mabel's room. The ranch hands had been banished to the bunkhouse, leaving him alone with his thoughts and worries. As night fell, Mabel's labor intensified. Mrs. Beatty wiped her brow with a cool cloth, offering encouragement and practical instructions. "That's it, child. You're doing wonderfully," she praised as Mabel pushed through another contraction. "I can see the head now. One more good push should do it." Gathering her remaining strength, Mabel bore down with all her might. There was a moment of searing pain, followed by blessed relief, and then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. A baby's cry, strong and indignant. "A boy," Mrs. Beatty announced, tears in her eyes as she lifted the squirming infant. A beautiful, healthy boy. Exhausted but overwhelmed with joy, Mabel reached for her son. Mrs. Beatty placed him on her chest after quickly cleaning and wrapping him in a soft blanket. "Hello, little one," Mabel whispered, tracing his tiny features with a trembling finger. Despite arriving early, he seemed perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a shock of dark hair that reminded her painfully of Henry. After attending to the afterbirth and ensuring mother and child were comfortable, Mrs. Beatty went to the kitchen where Owen still paced. "You can stop wearing a hole in my floor," she told him with a tired smile. "Miss Collins has a fine son. Both are doing well." Owen's shoulders sagged with relief. Would it be proper to see them?" "Since when have you cared about what's proper?" Mrs. Beatty asked with a knowing look. "Go on, just for a moment. They need rest." Owen approached Mabel's door with uncharacteristic hesitation, knocking softly before entering. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. Mabel, her hair loose around her shoulders, cradling a tiny bundle. Despite the exhaustion evident on her face, she glowed with a new mother's joy. "Mr. Ellis," she acknowledged softly, "come meet my son." Owen moved closer, his usual confidence replaced by an almost reverent caution. He peered at the infant, his expression a mixture of awe and tenderness. "He's perfect," he murmured. "Would you like to hold him?" Mabel offered, surprising herself with the suggestion. Owen looked startled. I don't have much experience with babies." "Neither do I," Mabel replied with a small laugh. "We'll learn together." With extreme care, Owen accepted the bundled infant, cradling him awkwardly at first before finding a more natural position. The baby squirmed but didn't cry, seeming content in the cowboy's strong arms. "Have you chosen a name?" Owen asked, his eyes still fixed on the tiny face. Mabel hesitated. She had considered naming him after her father, but now, seeing him in Owen's arms, another possibility presented itself. "I was thinking of William," she said. "After my father, William Owen Collins." Owen's head jerked up, his eyes meeting hers with surprise. "You would give him my name?" "As his middle name," Mabel clarified. if that's acceptable to you after all you've done for us." "I'm honored," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. He looked back at the infant. "William Owen. It's a fine name for a fine boy." The baby chose that moment to scrunch his face and let out a lusty cry. Owen hastily returned him to Mabel's arms, where he quickly settled. "He knows where he belongs," Owen observed. "For now," Mabel agreed. "But soon enough I'll need to consider our future." Owen frowned. "What do you mean?" "We can't impose on your hospitality forever," Mabel explained. "Once I've recovered and saved some money, William and I will need to find our own way." "You're not imposing," Owen said firmly. "This is your home for as long as you want it to be." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Mabel's eyes. "You're too kind, Mr. Ellis." "Owen," he corrected gently. "After all we've been through, I think you can call me Owen." "Owen," she repeated, the name feeling right on her lips. Mrs. Beatty appeared in the doorway. "That's enough visiting," she announced. "This new mother needs rest, and this new life needs feeding. Out with you, Owen." With a reluctant nod, Owen backed toward the door. "If you need anything at all, just call. I'll be close by." After he left, Mrs. Beatty helped Mabel position William for his first feeding, offering practical advice with matter-of-fact kindness. "That man," she remarked as she straightened the bed covers, "is completely smitten." Too exhausted to argue, Mabel merely smiled and focused on her son, marveling at the perfect miracle in her arms. Whatever the future held at this moment, she felt blessed beyond measure. The weeks following William's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful discoveries for Mabel. Each tiny milestone, the first time he focused on her face, his first real smile, the way his tiny hand wrapped around her finger filled her heart with wonder. Owen maintained a respectful distance, but showed his support in countless practical ways. He fashioned a cradle from pine wood, sanded smooth and rocked by the gentlest touch. He brought wild flowers to brighten Mabel's room when she was confined to bed in the early days. Most surprisingly, he seemed genuinely interested in William's development, often asking to hold the baby when he returned from his work around the ranch. As spring gave way to early summer, Mabel gradually resumed her duties in the household. Mrs. Beatty had been wonderful during her confinement, but Mabel was eager to contribute again, especially given the older woman's worsening arthritis. One morning, as Mabel kneaded bread dough with William sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Mrs. Beatty made an unexpected announcement. "I've been thinking," she began, settling heavily into a kitchen chair. "My sister in Denver has been asking me to come live with her for years. Her arthritis isn't as bad as mine and she could use the company." Mabel's hands stilled on the dough. "You're leaving us," Mrs. Beatty smiled sadly. "These old bones aren't what they used to be. I can't keep up with a ranch house anymore, and it's not fair to expect you to do everything, especially with little William to care for." "But we manage fine," Mabel protested, though she knew Mrs. Beatty's condition had been deteriorating. "You manage wonderfully," Mrs. Beatty agreed, "which is precisely why I feel I can go now. You've made this house a home again, Mabel, something it hadn't been in a very long time." Mabel felt tears prick her eyes. "When will you go?" "End of the month, I think." "That gives Owen time to make arrangements and you time to adjust to running things without my interference." "It's not interference," Mabel insisted. "It's guidance. I don't know what I would have done without you these past months." Mrs. Beatty patted her hand. "You would have managed. You're stronger than you know, my dear." That evening, after William had been fed and settled for his first sleep of the night, Mabel joined Owen on the porch. The summer twilight painted the landscape in shades of purple and gold, the distant mountains standing sentinel against the darkening sky. "Mrs. Beatty told me her plans," Mabel said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Owen nodded. She spoke to me last week. I tried to talk her out of it, but once that woman makes up her mind. It's the right decision for her, Mabel acknowledged. But it leaves you in a difficult position. Owen turned to look at her, his expression questioning. How so? A single man with a woman and child living in his home, no proper chaperone. Mabel explained. People will talk even more than they already do. People always talk, Owen replied dismissively. Doesn't make it worth listening to. Still, it's not proper. It could damage your reputation. Owen laughed, a short, surprised sound. Mabel, I'm a former Union soldier running a small ranch in Wyoming territory. I've never been particularly concerned with propriety. Perhaps you should be, Mabel countered. For the sake of your business, if nothing else. My business dealings depend on fair prices and quality stock, not gossip. Owen's expression grew serious. But if you're uncomfortable staying without Mrs. Beatty here, I understand. It's not that, Mabel hastened to assure him. You've been nothing but honorable. It's just what? Mabel struggled to articulate the thoughts that had been troubling her. I don't want to be a burden or a source of difficulty for you. You've already done more for William and me than I had any right to expect. Owen was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the distant mountains. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. Before you came, this place was just somewhere I lived. Did my work, ate my meals, slept my nights. Since you arrived, it's become a home. He turned to face her fully. The sound of your voice in the kitchen, William's cries in the night, even the scent of your soap hanging in the air, they've changed everything. I don't want to lose that. Mabel's heart thundered in her chest. What are you saying, Owen? I'm saying. He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. I'm asking if you might consider staying, permanently. As your housekeeper, Owen took a deep breath. As my wife. The word hung in the air between them, momentous and unexpected. Mabel stared at him, searching his face for signs that she had misunderstood. You want to marry me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I do, Owen confirmed. I know it's sudden. I know you're still healing from what happened with William's father, and I'm not asking for anything more than you're willing to give. But yes, I want to marry you. Why? Because I love you, he said simply. Both of you. I think I have almost from the beginning. Mabel's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. She had grown to care deeply for Owen, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the way his rare smiles transformed his weathered face. But marriage, after what had happened with Henry, I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to answer now, Owen assured her. Think about it. Talk to Mrs. Beatty if that helps. Just know that the offer stands whenever you're ready. William's cry from inside the house provided a welcome interruption. I should go to him, Mabel said, rising quickly. Owen nodded. Of course. Good night, Mabel. Good night, she replied, fleeing into the house with her thoughts in tumult. That night, as she nursed William in the quiet darkness of her room, Mabel considered Owen's proposal. The practical advantages were obvious: security for herself and her son, a permanent home, the protection of his name. But marriage should be more than practical, shouldn't it? She thought of Henry, with his charming words and empty promises. He had professed love while pursuing her, but when faced with responsibility, he had abandoned her without hesitation. Owen couldn't be more different. He had offered shelter when she was at her lowest, respect when others offered only judgment, and now a future she had thought forever lost to her. Did she love him? The question lingered as she placed William back in his cradle. The baby's features in sleep reminded her less of Henry now and more of the possibilities that lay ahead. A life here, on this ranch, with a man who had proven his worth not through words but through countless acts of kindness. Morning found Mabel in the kitchen earlier than usual, preparing a special breakfast. She had slept little, but her mind was clear. When Owen entered, the surprise on his face at seeing the table set with care and his favorite foods laid out was worth the extra effort. "What's the occasion?" he asked, removing his hat. Mabel took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your proposal." Owen immediately grew serious. "And I have conditions," Mabel said, surprising herself with her boldness. "If I agree to be your wife—" A smile tugged at the corner of Owen's mouth. "I'm listening. First, William is my priority. He must always be treated as your own." "Already do," Owen replied without hesitation. "Second, I want a true marriage, not just a convenient arrangement. If we do this, we do it properly before God and the community." Owen nodded solemnly. "Nothing less would honor you properly." Mabel steeled herself for the most difficult condition. "And third, I need time. Time to be sure of my feelings, to know that what I feel for you is truly love and not just gratitude." Owen's expression softened. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Even if it means waiting to consummate the marriage," Mabel asked, her cheeks flaming at her own boldness. "Even then," Owen assured her, though she could see the cost of this promise in his eyes. "I want you to come to me willingly, Mabel, not out of obligation." Relief and something warmer flooded through her. "Then yes," she said softly, "I will marry you, Owen Ellis." The joy that transformed his face took her breath away. He moved toward her, stopping just short of touching her. "May I?" he asked. At her nod, he gathered her gently into his arms, holding her as though she were something precious and fragile. Mabel allowed herself to lean into his strength, feeling for the first time that perhaps she had found not just shelter but a true home. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Mrs. Beatty was delighted, declaring she had known all along that they were perfectly suited. The ranch hands offered awkward but sincere congratulations, clearly pleased for their employer. The reaction in town was more mixed. When Owen and Mabel visited Jackson to arrange for the wedding, whispers followed them down the street. Outside the general store, they encountered Mrs. Harrington and her friends. "Mr. Ellis," she greeted coldly. "We hear congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Mrs. Harrington," Owen replied evenly. "Such a hasty arrangement," she continued, her gaze sliding to Mabel, "but I suppose some situations call for expedience." Before Mabel could respond, Owen placed a protective hand at the small of her back. "Nothing hasty about it," he corrected. "I've waited my whole life to find someone as extraordinary as Miss Collins. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have wedding plans to discuss with the minister." As they walked away, Mabel whispered, "You didn't have to say that." "I only spoke the truth," Owen replied. "And I won't have anyone, especially those old hens, making you feel less than the blessing you are." At the church, they met with Reverend Thompson, a kindly older man who had served the community for over 20 years. He welcomed them warmly, showing none of the judgment Mabel had feared. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said after hearing their situation. "Bringing people together through unexpected circumstances is one of his specialties." They set the date for 2 weeks hence, allowing time for Mrs. Beatty to help with preparations before her departure to Denver. The ceremony would be simple, held at the ranch rather than the church in town, with only a few guests in attendance. As the wedding day approached, Mabel found herself growing increasingly nervous. Not about marrying Owen, that decision felt right in her bones, but about the changes it would bring. Would sharing a home as husband and wife alter the easy companionship they had developed? Would Owen eventually regret taking on another man's child as his own? The night before the wedding, Mrs. Beatty found Mabel sitting alone on the porch, William sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Cold feet?" the older woman asked, settling beside her. "Not about marrying Owen," Mabel replied honestly. Just uncertainty about the future. Mrs. Beatty chuckled. Child, if there's one thing I've learned in my 73 years, it's that the future is always uncertain. All we can do is choose good companions for the journey. And you think Owen is a good choice, the best, Mrs. Beatty affirmed without hesitation. I've known that man through hard times and good. He doesn't waver, doesn't break promises, doesn't run when things get difficult. The way he looks at you and this child. She gently touched William's cheek. That's love, pure and simple. Mabel smiled, feeling her anxieties ease. I think I love him too, she admitted. It's different from what I felt for William's father, quieter but somehow stronger. That's how real love often is, Mrs. Beatty said wisely. Not all flash and excitement, but steady and true, like a hearth fire instead of a lightning strike. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Reverend Thompson arrived mid-morning, followed by a few neighbors whom Owen had invited. Mabel wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Beatty had helped alter, with wildflowers in her hair, and William, dressed in his best gown, cradled in her arms. When she emerged from the house to the area in the yard where Owen waited, the look on his face was everything she could have hoped for. Pure joy, tinged with reverence as though he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Reverend Thompson asked who gave this woman in marriage, Mrs. Beatty stepped forward. I do, she declared firmly, as one who has come to love her as a daughter. Mabel fought back tears as she handed William to Mrs. Beatty and joined hands with Owen. His fingers were warm and steady around hers, anchoring her as they spoke their vows. I, Owen James Ellis, take thee, Mabel Ann Collins, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it was Mabel's turn, her voice trembled slightly but gained strength with each word. As she spoke the final, till death do us part, she knew with certainty that she meant every word. Reverend Thompson smiled broadly. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Owen's kiss was gentle yet firm, a promise sealed with the touch of his lips against hers. When they parted, he whispered, "Thank you for this gift." The small gathering shared a celebratory meal prepared by Mrs. Beatty, who had outdone herself despite her arthritis. There was laughter and good wishes, and even a few presents from the neighbors, practical items for the household and a handmade quilt for William. As the sun began to set, the guests departed, leaving the newly formed family alone. Mrs. Beatty, who would leave for Denver in 2 days, retired early, giving the newlyweds privacy. Owen and Mabel sat together on the porch, William sleeping soundly in his father's arms. The word felt right to Mabel now. Owen was truly William's father in all the ways that mattered. Happy? Owen asked, his voice soft in the gathering twilight. More than I ever thought possible, Mabel replied honestly. Owen shifted William carefully, freeing one hand to reach for hers. I know we agreed to take things slowly, he began hesitantly, and I'll honor that promise. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, I'm here. No rush, no pressure. Mabel squeezed his hand, touched by his patience and understanding. Thank you for that. I don't think it will be a long wait, she admitted, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. But I appreciate the time, to be sure. They sat in companionable silence, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, certainly, but filled with possibility and hope. 2 weeks after Mrs. Beatty's departure for Denver, Mabel made a decision. The house had settled into a new rhythm, with her managing the household tasks and caring for William while Owen tended to the ranch. Their evenings were spent together, talking or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. Owen had been true to his word, making no demands, though Mabel sometimes caught him watching her with longing in his eyes. That night, after William was settled in his cradle, now moved to a small room adjacent to the main bedroom, Mabel took special care with her appearance. She brushed her hair until it shone and dabbed a drop of rose water behind each ear, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. When she entered the main bedroom, Owen was sitting on the edge of the bed removing his boots. He looked up, surprise registering on his face at her appearance. Mabel. She closed the door softly behind her. "I think it's time, don't you, for us to truly be husband and wife?" Owen stood slowly, careful not to rush toward her, though she could see the desire in his eyes. "Are you certain?" "I am," she said, crossing the room to stand before him. "These past weeks have shown me what I think I already knew in my heart. I love you, Owen Ellis." The words, spoken aloud for the first time, seemed to hang in the air between them. Owen's breath caught audibly. "Say that again," he requested, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you," Mabel repeated, more confidently this time. Owen's hands came up to cradle her face with infinite gentleness. "I have waited my whole life to hear those words from you," he whispered before lowering his mouth to hers. Their kiss began softly but quickly deepened as months of restrained desire found release. Mabel wound her arms around Owen's neck, pressing closer as his hands moved to her waist. When they finally parted to breathe, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he murmured. "No rushing, no mistakes. We've waited long enough," Mabel replied, emboldened by the love she saw reflected in his eyes. "I'm yours, Owen, as you are mine." That night, Mabel discovered the difference between a man who merely wanted and one who truly loved. Owen's touch was reverent yet passionate, careful of her comfort yet determined to bring her pleasure. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt like coming home, a perfect completion of the journey that had begun that cold morning behind the barn in Jackson. Afterward, lying in the circle of Owen's arms, Mabel felt a contentment she had never known before. This was what marriage should be, not just the physical union, but the deep sense of belonging, of being truly known and accepted. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm grateful," Mabel answered honestly, "for all of it, even the hard parts that led me here." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm the grateful one. You and William have given me a family I never thought I'd have." "Speaking of William," Mabel began, I was thinking, perhaps someday he might like a brother or sister." Owen raised himself on one elbow to look at her, joy lighting his features. "I'd like that very much," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Whenever you're ready." "Not right away," Mabel clarified, "but someday this house should be filled with children." "And love," Owen added. "Above all, love." As if on cue, William's cry sounded from the adjoining room. Mabel made to rise, but Owen stopped her with a gentle hand. "Let me," he said. "I'll bring him to you." Mabel watched as Owen pulled on his trousers and went to fetch her son, their son now, in every way that mattered. When he returned, cradling the fussing infant with practiced ease, her heart swelled with love for both of them. "Here's your mama, little man," Owen said, placing William in Mabel's arms. As she settled the baby to nurse, Owen sat beside them, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Looking at her husband's face, illuminated by the soft glow of the bedside lamp, Mabel saw everything she had ever wanted: strength, tenderness, and unwavering devotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Owen asked. "For saying stand with me when I needed it most." Owen's smile was gentle as he pressed a kiss to her hair. "Always, Mabel, always." Autumn came to Wyoming territory with a riot of color and the promise of winter not far behind. The aspen trees turned golden, creating patches of light among the evergreens that dotted the hillsides around the Ellis ranch. Mabel stood on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill, watching as Owen worked with one of the young horses in the corral. At 8 months, William was growing strong and sturdy, sitting up on his own and beginning to crawl. Currently, he was content in his cradle beside her, amusing himself with a wooden rattle Owen had carved for him. His dark hair had lightened somewhat, and his eyes had settled into a clear blue that reminded Mabel of the Wyoming sky and of his adoptive father. The past few months had been the happiest of Mabel's life. Marriage to Owen had brought a sense of security and belonging she had never known, even before her parents' deaths. They had settled into a comfortable routine that balanced the demands of the ranch with family life. In the evenings, Owen would often read aloud from one of his books while Mabel sewed or mended, William sleeping or playing between them. Letters from Mrs. Beatty arrived regularly, full of news from Denver and motherly advice. She reported that her health had improved in the gentler climate, though she missed her family at the ranch terribly. In her last letter, she had hinted at a possible visit in the spring, an idea that delighted Mabel. Life wasn't without challenges, of course. Their trips into Jackson still sometimes met with cold stares or whispered comments, particularly from Mrs. Harrington and her circle. But as time passed, and the community saw the stability of the Ellis family, much of the initial judgment had faded. Reverend Thompson and his wife had become particular friends, visiting the ranch occasionally and always treating William as Owen's true son. In the corral, Owen dismounted from the young horse, patting its neck with approval before removing the saddle. He looked up, catching sight of Mabel on the porch, and raised a hand in greeting. Even after months of marriage, the sight of him still quickened her pulse, his tall frame moving with natural grace, the way the morning sun highlighted the auburn in his hair and beard. She waved back, smiling as he handed the reins to one of the hands and made his way toward the house. At the bottom of the porch steps, he paused to remove his hat and wipe his brow. "How's the training coming?" Mabel asked. "Good. That bay filly has a natural gait." "She'll fetch a fine price come spring," Owen replied, climbing the steps to join her. He bent to peer at William, who gurgled happily at the sight of him. "And how's my boy this morning?" "Restless," Mabel reported. "I think he's trying to figure out how to stand. He pulls himself up on everything he can reach." Owen chuckled, reaching down to ruffle William's hair. "Going to be riding before you know it, son." "Don't rush him," Mabel admonished, though she couldn't help smiling at Owen's enthusiasm. Owen straightened, moving to stand beside her at the porch railing. They gazed out over the ranch together, his arm settling comfortably around her waist. "I need to ride into town later," he said. "We're running low on flour and coffee, and I want to check if there's mail." "I could use some thread," Mabel added. "William's growing so fast I'm constantly letting out his clothes." Owen nodded. "Want to come along, make a day of it? Weather's fine, and it might be our last chance before winter sets in properly." Mabel considered the suggestion. Their last trip to town had been peaceful enough, and she did enjoy the opportunity to see something beyond the ranch occasionally. "That sounds lovely," she agreed. "I'll pack a lunch." They set out mid-morning, William securely bundled against the autumn chill and nestled between them on the wagon seat. The journey passed pleasantly, with Owen pointing out changes in the landscape since their last trip, a beaver dam being constructed in the creek, an eagle's nest in a tall pine, fresh elk tracks crossing the road. Jackson was busy when they arrived, the streets filled with ranchers and townspeople preparing for the coming winter. Owen helped Mabel down from the wagon, lifting William into his arms with practiced ease. As they walked toward the general store, Mabel noted with satisfaction that fewer heads turned their way than during previous visits. Mr. Patterson greeted them warmly when they entered his establishment. "The Ellis family. Good to see you folks. What can I help you with today?" As Owen listed their needs, Mr. Patterson bustled about gathering items. "Got a letter for you," he mentioned, retrieving an envelope from beneath the counter. "Came in yesterday's post." Owen examined the return address with surprise. "It's from my sisters-in-laws back east," he said to Mabel. "Haven't heard from them in months." While Owen read the letter, Mabel selected thread and examined fabric for new curtains in the kitchen. William, perched on Owen's hip, reached curiously for the colorful bolts of cloth. "Got a good eye, that boy," Mr. Patterson commented. "Just like his pa." Mabel glanced up, expecting to correct the assumption, but Owen was smiling broadly, clearly pleased by the misunderstanding. She realized with a rush of warmth that it wasn't really a misunderstanding at all. Owen was William's father in every way that mattered. "What does the letter say?" she asked as they completed their purchases. Owen's expression was thoughtful. "My sisters-in-laws are moving west to Colorado. They're bringing my niece and nephews with them." "That's wonderful news," Mabel said, knowing how much Owen missed his sister's children. "Will they visit us?" "They're hoping to," Owen confirmed. "Probably next summer after they're settled." With their shopping complete, they decided to have lunch at the cafe before heading home. As they entered, Mabel was surprised to see Mrs. Harrington seated with her usual companions, plus a man Mabel didn't recognize, well-dressed and clearly not local. Mrs. Harrington looked up, her expression souring slightly at the sight of the Ellis family. The stranger followed her gaze, his eyes widening as they landed on Mabel. Time seemed to stop as Mabel stared back, recognition hitting her like a physical blow. Henry, William's biological father, here in Jackson, Wyoming. She felt the color drain from her face as Henry rose from his chair, his expression a mixture of shock and calculation. Owen, sensing her distress, placed a protective hand on the small of her back. "Mabel," he asked quietly, "what's wrong?" Before she could answer, Henry was approaching their table, his familiar, charming smile firmly in place. "Mabel Collins," he said, as though they had parted on the best of terms. "What an extraordinary coincidence." "It's Ellis now," Owen corrected, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. "Mabel Ellis, my wife." Henry's gaze shifted to Owen, sizing him up with obvious disdain before returning to Mabel. "I see you didn't waste any time." The implication behind his words sent a flush of anger through Mabel. "Mr. Ellis was kind enough to offer me and my son a home when we had none," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. Henry's eyes moved to William, who was watching the stranger with solemn curiosity from Owen's arms. Something flickered across Henry's face, recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Your son," he repeated softly. "He has your eyes." "He has his father's eyes," Mabel stated firmly, looking directly at Owen. The significance of her words wasn't lost on anyone present. Henry's expression hardened. "I understand you're passing through town," Owen said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a question. "What brings you to Wyoming territory? It's a long way from Missouri." "Business opportunities," Henry replied vaguely. "Mrs. Harrington's husband has interests in mining that might align with my investments." "How fortunate for you both," Owen commented. "Now, if you'll excuse us, my family and I would like to enjoy our lunch." Henry hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but Mrs. Harrington called to him from her table. With a stiff nod, he retreated, though his eyes lingered on William until he returned to his seat. "That's him, isn't it?" Owen asked quietly once Henry was out of earshot. "William's biological father." Mabel nodded, her appetite gone. "I never thought I'd see him again. What is he doing here of all places?" "Nothing good, I'd wager," Owen replied grimly. "But it doesn't matter. He can't touch us, Mabel. You're my wife, William is my son. The law is clear on that." Mabel wanted to believe him, but fear had taken root in her heart. Henry had never been one to walk away from something he wanted, and the calculating look he had given William suggested he might want something indeed. Their lunch was subdued, the unexpected encounter casting a shadow over what should have been a pleasant outing. Mabel noticed Henry and Mrs. Harrington deep in conversation, occasionally glancing their way. When they had finished eating, Owen suggested they head home immediately rather than completing their other errands in town. The journey back to the ranch was tense, with Mabel constantly looking over her shoulder as though expecting to see Henry following them. Owen attempted to reassure her, but his own worry was evident in the set of his jaw and the way his eyes scanned the road ahead. That evening, after William was asleep, Mabel and Owen sat before the fire in the parlor, the encounter in town weighing heavily on both their minds. "I should have told you more about him," Mabel said, breaking the silence. "About Henry." Owen shook his head. "You told me what mattered, that he abandoned you when you needed him most. The rest is past." "But now he's here," Mabel insisted, "and I saw how he looked at William, like he was calculating something." Owen frowned, stoking the fire. "What could he want after all this time?" "I don't know," Mabel admitted, "but Henry was always ambitious. His family had money once before the war. He was constantly scheming to restore their fortune and position." "You think he sees William as part of that ambition somehow?" Mabel nodded slowly. "His family name was important to him. An heir would matter, especially if he's trying to build business connections." Owen's expression darkened. "William is our son now, by law and by love. No court would say otherwise, especially given that he abandoned you both." "I pray you're right," Mabel whispered, fear clutching at her heart. Owen moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me, Mabel. I won't let anything happen to you or William. I promise you that. Whatever Henry's game is, he won't win." The certainty in his voice eased her fears somewhat. Owen had never broken a promise to her, had never given her reason to doubt his word or his strength. If anyone could protect them from Henry's machinations, it was him. "I love you," she said, leaning forward to press her forehead against his. "Both of you are everything to me." "And you to us," Owen replied, his voice rough with emotion. "We're a family, Mabel. Nothing and no one will change that." They retired to bed shortly after, holding each other close in the darkness. Despite Owen's reassurances, sleep eluded Mabel for much of the night. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were troubled by memories of Henry's calculating smile. The next week passed without incident, though Mabel found herself jumping at unexpected sounds and keeping William closer than usual. Owen increased the frequency of his rides around the property's boundaries and instructed the hands to report any strangers immediately. On Saturday, Sheriff Bradley rode out to the ranch, his expression grave as Owen greeted him in the yard. "Sorry to disturb your weekend, Ellis," he said, dismounting, "but I thought you should know there's been some inquiries about your family in town." Owen's jaw tightened. "What kind of inquiries?" "Fellow name of Thornton's been asking around about Mrs. Ellis, her history, how long she's been here, about the boy." "Henry Thornton," Mabel said, joining them on the porch with William in her arms. "He's from Missouri." Sheriff Bradley nodded. "So he said." "Claims to be an old acquaintance of yours, Mrs. Ellis. He's William's biological father," Owen stated flatly, "though he abandoned them both before the child was born. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. I see, that explains a few things. What things? Mabel asked, dread pooling in her stomach. He's been talking to Judge Wilson for one thing, and he's hired Simmons as his lawyer. Owen swore under his breath. He's building a case. Seems like, Sheriff Bradley agreed. Thought you ought to know. Thank you, Sheriff, Owen said. We appreciate the warning. After the sheriff departed, Owen and Mabel retreated to the kitchen, where they could talk while William played on a blanket nearby. He wants to take William, Mabel said, voicing her deepest fear. After all this time, after abandoning us both, he wants to claim his son. Owen paced the kitchen, his expression thunderous. He has no legal right. We're married, I've claimed William as my own. The law favors us. But Henry has money, Mabel reminded him. And connections, if he's courting Mrs. Harrington's circle. Judge Wilson is her uncle by marriage. That doesn't change the facts, Owen insisted. No judge worth his salt would take a child from his mother and give him to a man who abandoned them both. Unless that man convinces the court that the mother is unfit, Mabel said softly. A woman who had a child out of wedlock who fled her home under a cloud of scandal. Owen stopped his pacing, turning to face her with fierce determination. That won't happen, Mabel. I won't let it happen. What can we do? She asked, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Owen thought for a moment. First, we need our own lawyer. I'll write to Thomas Jenkins in Cheyenne. He handled the purchase of this ranch years ago, knows the territorial laws better than most. Then we need to shore up our standing in the community. The more people who will speak for your character, the better. Mabel nodded, trying to take comfort in his practical approach. Reverend Thompson has always been kind, and Martha at the cafe. Good, Owen agreed. And we'll invite the neighbors for Sunday dinner next week. The more folks who see us as a proper family, the stronger our position. He crossed to where she stood, pulling her into a fierce embrace. We'll fight this, Mabel, together. I promised to stand with you, and I meant it. The following days were tense but productive as Owen and Mabel implemented their plan. Jenkins, the lawyer from Cheyenne, responded promptly to Owen's letter, promising to arrive within the week. Preparations for Sunday dinner occupied Mabel's hands, if not her mind, as she baked and cleaned to present their home in the best possible light. On Wednesday, a formal notice arrived from Judge Wilson's court, confirming their worst fears. Henry Thornton had filed a petition for custody of William, claiming rights as the biological father and alleging that Mabel had fled Missouri to deprive him of his paternal rights. It's all lies, Mabel said, her hands shaking as she read the document. He knew I was with child. He chose to leave. We'll prove that, Owen assured her, though his own face was grim. Jenkins will know how to proceed. Jenkins arrived the following day, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with a reputation for thoroughness. He listened carefully as Mabel recounted her history with Henry, making notes and asking pointed questions. He abandoned you without support, knowing you were pregnant, Jenkins clarified. Yes, Mabel confirmed. He left a note saying he had opportunities elsewhere that couldn't wait. He knew my parents were gone, that I had no one. Jenkins nodded, writing something in his notebook, and he made no attempt to contact you after the child's birth. No offers of support, none. I didn't even know where he had gone. That works in our favor, Jenkins said. As does your marriage to Mr. Ellis and his formal acknowledgement of William as his son. The courts generally prefer to maintain stable family units rather than disrupt them. But, Owen prompted, sensing the lawyer's hesitation. But Mr. Thornton comes from a prominent family in Missouri, despite their reduced circumstances after the war. He has connections, even here in Wyoming territory, and he's painting a very different picture claiming that you, Mrs. Ellis, fled without informing him of the pregnancy and that he's been searching for his child ever since learning of his existence. Mabel's hands clenched in her lap. That's not what happened. I believe you, Jenkins assured her, but we need evidence beyond your word against his. Are there people in Missouri who knew the truth? Who saw him abandon you? Who knew you were with child before you left? Mabel thought carefully. The minister and his wife knew, and Sarah Fletcher, who worked at the millinery shop with me. She was the one who found Henry's note and brought it to me. Excellent, Jenkins said. I'll need to depose them either in person or by correspondence. Their testimonies could be crucial. The discussion continued into the evening, with Jenkins outlining their legal strategy and the steps they would need to take before the hearing, scheduled for 3 weeks hence. By the time he departed the next morning, returning to Cheyenne to begin gathering evidence, Mabel felt marginally more hopeful. They had a plan, a competent advocate, and the truth on their side. Sunday dinner with the neighbors proved another small victory. 6 families from surrounding ranches accepted their invitation, filling the house with warmth and conversation. William, now crawling efficiently and pulling himself up on furniture to stand, charmed everyone with his sunny disposition and clear attachment to Owen. Never seen a boy more like his father, commented Matthew Daniels, whose ranch bordered Owen's to the east. Got the same way of tilting his head when he's thinking. Mabel exchanged a glance with Owen, who beamed with pride. These were the observations that could make all the difference in court, the recognition by their community that Owen and William were truly father and son in the ways that mattered. As the guests departed, Reverend Thompson and his wife lingered, clearly wanting a private word. We've heard about the situation with Mr. Thornton, Reverend Thompson said once they were alone. Martha and I want you to know that we stand with you completely. We'll testify to your character and to the loving home you've made for William. Thank you, Mabel said, tears pricking her eyes at this show of support. It means more than I can say. The community is behind you, Martha Thompson added, more than you might realize. Even some who were hesitant at first can see what a fine family you've become. Their words were a balm to Mabel's worried heart. Perhaps Henry's money and connections wouldn't be enough to overcome the truth that was evident to anyone who saw them together, that Owen, Mabel, and William were a family bound by love as much as by law. The weeks leading up to the hearing passed in a flurry of preparation. Jenkins returned from Cheyenne with sworn statements from Sarah Fletcher and the minister in Missouri, both confirming Mabel's account of Henry's abandonment. He also brought the disturbing news that Henry had been seen in the company of Judge Wilson outside of court, suggesting an attempt to influence the proceedings improperly. I've filed a motion requesting that Judge Wilson recuse himself due to potential bias, Jenkins informed them. If successful, Judge Parker from Cheyenne would hear the case instead. And if not successful, Owen asked. Jenkins' expression was grim. Then we present our case as convincingly as possible and prepare for an appeal if necessary. The night before the hearing, Mabel found herself unable to sleep. She slipped from bed, careful not to wake Owen, and went to William's room. The boy slept peacefully, unaware of the battle being waged over his future. Mabel stood watching him, memorizing every detail of his face in the moonlight that filtered through the window. He's ours, Owen's voice came softly from the doorway. No matter what happens tomorrow, he's our son. Mabel turned, seeing the same fear and determination in Owen's eyes that she felt in her heart. I can't lose him, Owen, I can't. You won't, Owen promised, moving to stand beside her. We won't. Whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, William stays with us. The following morning, they dressed in their best clothes and made the journey to town, William between them on the wagon seat as always. Jenkins met them outside the courthouse, his expression cautiously optimistic. "Judge Wilson has recused himself," he informed them. "Judge Parker arrived from Cheyenne this morning. He's known for being fair and thorough." Relief flooded through Mabel. Their first hurdle overcome, they entered the courthouse with renewed hope. The hearing room was crowded with spectators. It seemed half the town had turned out to witness the proceedings. Mabel spotted Mrs. Harrington and her friends near the front, their expressions smug. But she also saw many friendly faces: the Thompsons, Martha from the cafe, Mr. Patterson from the general store, and several of their dinner guests from the previous Sunday. Henry sat at the opposing table with his lawyer, looking every inch the prosperous businessman in a suit that must have cost more than Owen earned in 3 months. When he caught Mabel's eye, he offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Judge Parker, a lean man with silver hair and piercing eyes, called the court to order. "This is a hearing to determine custodial rights for the minor child William Owen Collins Ellis," he stated. "Mr. Simmons, please present your client's case." Henry's lawyer rose, a polished man with an Eastern accent. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Henry Thornton, seeks recognition of his parental rights and primary custody of his biological son, currently known as William Ellis." Mr. Thornton was unaware of the child's existence until recently, having been deprived of knowledge of the pregnancy when Miss Collins, now Mrs. Ellis, fled Missouri without informing him. Upon learning of his son's existence, Mr. Thornton immediately took steps to assert his natural and legal rights as father. The lawyer continued, painting a picture of Henry as a successful businessman who could provide William with advantages that a small rancher like Owen could never match: the best education, travel opportunities, social connections that would serve him well in life. Furthermore, Simmons concluded, Mr. Thornton is prepared to offer generous visitation rights to Mrs. Ellis, recognizing the importance of a mother's influence. He asks only for what is rightfully his: the opportunity to raise his son and provide him with the Ellis cannot. Jenkins rose next, his manner less flamboyant but equally confident. "Your Honor, the facts of this case are clear. Mr. Thornton abandoned Mabel Collins when she informed him of her pregnancy, leaving her without support or resources. She came to Wyoming not to deprive Mr. Thornton of his rights, but to escape the shame and judgment her condition brought upon her in their small Missouri town." He outlined how Owen had offered Mabel not just employment but dignity when others shunned her, how their relationship had grown naturally into love, and how Owen had willingly claimed William as his own from birth. "The law recognizes Mr. Ellis as William's father in every way that matters," Jenkins stated firmly. "He has provided a loving home, financial support, and has formed a bond with the child that is evident to all who see them together. To separate them now would cause irreparable harm to a family that is thriving despite the difficult circumstances of its formation." Judge Parker listened attentively to both arguments before calling for witnesses. Henry took the stand first, presenting himself as a man who had been searching desperately for his child after being cruelly deprived of knowledge of his existence. When Jenkins cross-examined him, however, cracks began to appear in his story. "Mr. Thornton, did you or did you not leave a note for Miss Collins before departing Missouri?" Jenkins asked. Henry hesitated. "I may have left a brief note explaining my need to pursue business opportunities." "And did this note mention her pregnancy, which she had revealed to you the previous day?" "I don't recall specifically," Henry hedged. "It was a difficult time." "I have here a sworn statement from Miss Sarah Fletcher," Jenkins continued, holding up a document, "who found your note after your departure and brought it to Miss Collins. She quotes it verbatim. "Mabel, I've been offered an opportunity in Colorado that cannot wait. We both know a child now would only hold me back from my ambitions. Perhaps it's better this way. Henry, does that refresh your memory, Mr. Thornton?" The color drained from Henry's face as murmurs ran through the courtroom. "That's not. She must have misremembered. And I have a sworn statement from Reverend Jameson of Missouri, confirming that Miss Collins came to him for counsel after your departure, distressed not only by her condition, but by your abandonment. Are you suggesting that both Miss Fletcher and Reverend Jameson are lying under oath?" Henry had no good answer, and his credibility deteriorated further under Jenkins' methodical questioning. By the time he left the stand, even Mrs. Harrington was looking less certain of his cause. Mabel testified next, her voice steady as she recounted the truth of her relationship with Henry, her decision to leave Missouri after facing judgment from the community, and her life with Owen. When asked about William's relationship with Owen, her eyes filled with tears of pride. "Owen has been William's true father from the moment he was born," she stated. "He was there for his first smile, his first word, his first steps just last week. They have a bond that can't be measured or replaced." Owen's testimony followed similar lines, his quiet strength and obvious love for both Mabel and William evident in every word. Several community members also spoke on their behalf, including Reverend Thompson, who testified to the Ellis family's good standing in the community and the loving home they provided. As the hearing stretched into the afternoon, Judge Parker called a brief recess before rendering his decision. Mabel and Owen waited anxiously in an antechamber, William now fussy after the long day. "You did wonderfully," Owen assured her, his hand warm on hers. Everyone could see the truth. Jenkins joined them, his expression cautiously optimistic. "Judge Parker is fair but traditional. He puts great stock in family stability and the child's best interests. I believe we've made a strong case." When court reconvened, the room fell silent as Judge Parker prepared to deliver his ruling. He looked first at Henry, then at Owen and Mabel, his expression grave. "In matters of custody, this court must consider not just biological connections, but what arrangement will best serve the child's well-being and future prospects," he began. "Mr. Thornton has demonstrated his material ability to provide for the child, but has failed to satisfactorily explain his absence during the first 8 months of the child's life, or his abandonment of the child's mother during her pregnancy." Mabel's grip on Owen's hand tightened as Judge Parker continued. "Mr. and Mrs. Ellis have provided a stable, loving home for the child since birth. Mr. Ellis has formally acknowledged the child as his own and has, by all accounts, formed a strong paternal bond with him. The community testifies to their good character and the wholesome environment they provide." Judge Parker paused, his gaze settling on William, who was now sleeping peacefully in Mabel's arms. "It is the finding of this court that the best interests of William Owen Collins Ellis are served by remaining in the custody of Owen and Mabel Ellis, whom this court recognizes as his legal parents in all respects. Mr. Thornton's petition for custody is denied." A cheer went up from the Ellis supporters in the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. "However," Judge Parker added, "the court recognizes Mr. Thornton's biological connection to the child. Should he wish to maintain a relationship with the boy, reasonable visitation may be arranged through counsel, subject to the Ellis family's convenience and the child's well-being. This court retains jurisdiction over this matter should circumstances change or disputes arise." Henry rose, his face a mask of fury. "This isn't over," he said loudly enough for Mabel and Owen to hear as he stormed from the courtroom. But for Mabel, cradled in Owen's embrace with William safe between them, it was over. They had fought for their family and won. Whatever threats Henry might make in his anger, they would face them together just as they had faced everything since that first morning behind the barn in Jackson. As they left the courthouse, friends and neighbors surrounded them with congratulations and support. The journey home was filled with a lightness that had been absent for weeks, the future stretching before them bright with possibility. That evening, after William was asleep, Owen and Mabel sat on the porch as they had so many nights before, watching the stars emerge above the Wyoming landscape they both loved. "You think he'll try again?" Mabel asked, voicing the worry that lingered despite their victory. Owen considered this. He might. Men like Henry don't accept defeat easily, but will be ready if he does. And if he wants visitation, as the judge suggested, "Then we'll handle that too," Owen replied. "William should know his history when he's old enough to understand. We have nothing to fear from the truth." Mabel leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his steadiness. "When I ran from Missouri, I never imagined finding this a home, a husband who loves me, a community that accepts us." "When I found you behind that barn," Owen said softly, "I never imagined how completely you would change my life. You and William brought light and purpose back to me. To think it all began with you saying 'stand with me' when I needed it most," Mabel mused. Owen turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "And I meant it then as I mean it now for all our days, Mabel. Whatever comes, we face it together." As winter settled over Wyoming territory, blankets of snow transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland, the Ellis family found themselves embracing a season of peace and quiet joy. The custody hearing had strengthened their standing in the community rather than diminishing it, and many who had once whispered behind Mabel's back now greeted her warmly when she ventured into town. Henry Thornton had departed Jackson the day after the hearing, returning to his business interests without pursuing the visitation rights the judge had mentioned. Jenkins, before returning to Cheyenne, had advised them to be vigilant but not fearful. "Men like Thornton cut their losses when a venture proves unprofitable," he had explained. "My guess is he'll find other ways to advance his ambitions now that this path is closed." As Christmas approached, Mabel threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm, determined to make William's first Christmas special. She baked cookies and sewed new curtains for the parlor, while Owen ventured into the hills to find the perfect pine tree for their celebration. The holiday itself was quiet but perfect, just the three of them exchanging simple gifts before a roaring fire. Owen had carved a set of wooden animals for William, who was now pulling himself up and cruising around furniture with increasing confidence. For Mabel, he had ordered a beautiful leather-bound journal from a catalog, knowing how she enjoyed writing down her thoughts in the evenings. Mabel's gift to Owen brought tears to his eyes, a formal portrait of the three of them, taken during their last trip to Cheyenne. The photographer had captured them perfectly, Owen standing tall and proud, Mabel seated before him with William on her lap, all three smiling as though sharing a private joke. "It's perfect," Owen said, running his fingers gently over the image. "Our family." As winter deepened, they settled into comfortable routines. The cold kept them close to home, with Owen tending to the necessary ranch chores while Mabel managed the household and cared for William. In the evenings, they would read or talk by the fire, planning for the spring planting and the expansion of the horse breeding operation that Owen hoped would increase their income. One snowy evening in late January, as they sat together after William had been put to bed, Mabel broached a subject that had been on her mind for some time. "Owen," she began hesitantly, "do you remember when I mentioned that someday William might like a brother or sister." Owen looked up from the bridle he was mending, his expression curious. "I remember. I've been thinking that someday might be sooner rather than later," Mabel continued, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "If you're still amenable to the idea." Understanding dawned on Owen's face. "Mabel, are you saying?" She nodded, her smile broadening. "I believe we'll be welcoming another little Ellis sometime in late summer." The bridle fell forgotten as Owen crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. "Are you certain?" he asked, joy radiating from every feature. "As certain as one can be at this stage," Mabel confirmed. "Mrs. Thompson confirmed my suspicions when she visited last week." Owen whooped with delight, lifting Mabel off her feet and spinning her in a circle that left them both laughing breathlessly. "Another baby," he marveled, setting her gently back on her feet. "Our baby." The emphasis on "our" wasn't lost on Mabel. While Owen had claimed William as his own in every way that mattered, this child would be connected to them both by blood as well as love. "I hope you're not disappointed if it's another boy," Mabel teased. "The Ellis men seem to be quite strong-willed." "Boy or girl, it makes no difference," Owen assured her. "Another child to love is all I could ask for." The weeks and months that followed were filled with quiet anticipation as they prepared for the new addition to their family. William, now walking confidently and beginning to form simple words, seemed to sense the change coming, often patting Mabel's growing belly with curiosity. Spring brought the promised visit from Mrs. Beatty, who arrived from Denver full of stories and bearing gifts for William. She was overjoyed at the news of the coming baby and insisted on staying through the summer to help with the birth and early weeks. "As if I would miss welcoming another Ellis into the world," she declared when Owen expressed concern about the imposition on her time. "Besides, my sister is driving me to distraction with her fussing. A few months away will do us both good." With Mrs. Beatty's experienced help, the house was soon prepared for the new arrival. The small room adjacent to theirs, which had served as William's nursery, was freshened with new paint and curtains. William, now almost 18 months old, was moved to a proper bedroom down the hall, a transition he accepted with surprising ease. Summer brought the promised visit from Owen's niece and nephews, now living in Colorado with their grandparents. The house rang with children's laughter as the cousins became acquainted, William trailing after the older children with determined enthusiasm. Owen watched them with quiet joy, occasionally catching Mabel's eye across the room with a look that spoke volumes about the family they had created together. As Mabel's time drew near, the heat of August made her increasingly uncomfortable. Owen insisted she rest during the hottest part of the day, taking over many of her duties despite her protests. "You carried William alone," he reminded her. "This time you have me to share the burden." "It's hardly a burden," Mabel replied, though she gratefully accepted his help. "But I appreciate it all the same." Mrs. Beatty's presence proved invaluable when Mabel's labor began in the middle of a sultry August night. Unlike William's early and somewhat frightening arrival, this birth proceeded smoothly, if painfully. Owen remained nearby throughout, fetching water and linens at Mrs. Beatty's direction, and offering Mabel quiet encouragement during the difficult moments. Just as dawn broke over the eastern mountains, their daughter made her entrance into the world, a robust girl with a shock of auburn hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire household. Mrs. Beatty placed her in Mabel's arms with tears of joy in her eyes. "She's beautiful," Mabel whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes with wonder. "Perfect." Owen, allowed into the room once mother and child were cleaned and settled, approached the bed with the same reverence he had shown when first meeting William. But this time there was no hesitation as he reached for his daughter, cradling her with practiced ease. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father." The simple statement brought tears to Mabel's eyes. With William, Owen had become a father through choice and love. With this child, born of their union, the relationship was acknowledged from the first breath. "What shall we name her?" Owen asked, his voice rough with emotion. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on a final choice. Now, looking at her daughter's delicate features and Owen's unmistakable auburn hair, Mabel knew. "Elizabeth," she suggested. "After your mother, Elizabeth Grace Ellis." Owen nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. "It's perfect," he finally managed, "just like her." Later that day, Mrs. Beatty brought William to meet his sister. The toddler approached the bed cautiously, eyes wide with curiosity. "Baby," he announced, pointing at the bundle in Mabel's arms. "Yes, William," Mabel confirmed. "This is your sister, Elizabeth. Can you say Elizabeth?" "Liz," he offered, bringing a laugh from the adults. "Close enough," Owen conceded, lifting his son to get a better view. "What do you think of her?" William studied the infant solemnly before pronouncing. "Pretty baby." "She is indeed," Mrs. Beatty agreed. "The prettiest baby in Wyoming territory, except perhaps for her brother when he was born." The first weeks with Elizabeth passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and adjustments as the family settled into new routines. William, after an initial period of jealousy, became his sister's devoted guardian, bringing his wooden toys to show her and warning visitors to be quiet for Liz. By the time Mrs. Beatty departed for Denver in October, promising to return for Christmas, the Ellis household had found its new rhythm. Elizabeth was a content baby, sleeping well and growing steadily. William, now talking in simple sentences, blossomed under Owen's attentive fathering and Mabel's patient guidance. One crisp autumn evening, with both children asleep and the day's work complete, Owen and Mabel sat together on the porch as they often did, sharing the peaceful moment before retiring for the night. The stars spread across the Wyoming sky in breathtaking profusion, a sight that never failed to fill Mabel with wonder. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been?" she asked, nestled against Owen's side for warmth. "If I hadn't fled Missouri, if you hadn't found me behind that barn." Owen considered this. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at what we've built together and I can't imagine any other path." "Nor can I," Mabel agreed. "Even the hard parts, Henry's abandonment, the journey here alone, the fear and uncertainty, they all led me to you, to us. And now look at us," Owen said with quiet pride. "A ranch that's thriving, 2 beautiful children, respect in the community. A family," Mabel added softly. "A real family, built on love and choice rather than mere circumstance." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. "I thank God every day for the courage that brought you to Jackson, and for whatever providence led me behind Wilkinson's barn that morning." Mabel smiled, remembering her fear and suspicion when the tall cowboy had first approached her. How far they had come from that moment, from strangers to family, from wariness to absolute trust. "I never believed in fairy tales," she confessed. "Even as a girl, I thought the stories of princes rescuing damsels in distress were foolish dreams." "And now," Owen prompted. "Now I know better," Mabel replied. "True rescue isn't about being swept away from troubles. It's about finding someone willing to stand with you through them." Owen's arm tightened around her. "I'll always stand with you, Mabel, through whatever comes our way." As they sat together under the vast Wyoming sky, Mabel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened, pregnant young woman hiding from judgment to a wife, mother, and respected member of the community. It seemed almost miraculous. Yet it wasn't really a miracle, she realized. It was simply what happened when judgment gave way to acceptance, when fear yielded to love, and when two people chose to stand together against whatever life might bring. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge they were cherished. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance across the heavens. And on the porch of the home they had built together, Owen and Mabel Ellis sat side by side, their hands intertwined, facing the future as they had faced everything since that first fateful meeting together.